Alright, so here we are kicking into the second turn of October. Bad weather's about to happen. Some exciting stuff going on. From the random events, the only really kind of interesting thing is some cash showed up in Famagusta, this time for, geez, I don't remember who. I think the Normans, no, had to be the Germans. I'm not sure. Who just got it? Yeah, it had to be the Germans because the Normans had some here. The entirety of the... Oh, and another fleet showed up for the southern Normans. That's the last fleet. There's 4 Crusader fleets available. So each one has one. The Crusaders made a deal whereby all these fleets would travel over here. They're going to bring Robert, presumably somewhere along the coast here. Not Famagusta. They're not willing to commit to that. Now, he could send one of the ships off to Famagusta with his own forces, little force to grab it, but that would kind of be a violation of the agreement that they have. The reason for this is to provide a line of supply to Antioch. That'll be cleared up, though. As you can... Oh, I forgot to move Budamedes. I've got him with the orders to get to here. Raymond bribed this. The Mossels bribed here and moved in. Raymond didn't move in. I have gone back on my decision here to allow the Armenians to be given orders after they're bribed. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think the orders that were written for them are the ones they should follow. So if you bribe them out of someone else's hands, they march with that other person and turncoat at another time. It's really tough to decide how you should interpret these rules. And really, you're going to have to house rule this game a lot to make it work at all. We do have a pile, though. Right here at Antioch. You can see all the Syrians actually moved out of the city. There's one strength point there. They've all conglomerated there. Since everybody moved into the hex, nobody was sitting there defending, there is the possibility that either side could be the attacker. So, what we have to do is determine who the leader is. For the Syrians, it's fairly easy. They get their choice. They're all one player. So they're going to put Dukak in charge. But over here for the Crusaders, they have 2 options. Now, Bohemon's the better leader. I think I need to make him... I think I need to leave him in charge rather than let Godfrey take over. Godfrey's less in a military capability. He also has less guile, but that would just affect the die roll. The winner of this battle could well get a point of guile. So, what I got to do is I got to count those Syrians, and there's a lot of them there, and count the Crusaders that are present, and then I'll bring you through the battle. Alright, so what do we have? Well, for the Syrians it's easy. There's 51 strength points there after I compact the troops. For Bohemond and Godfrey, well, you got to count the little boxes. Luckily, though, I can cheat because I've been keeping track of how many strength points there are in each force. So, Bohemond has 27, Godfrey has 43. That sounds like 70 strength points. I clearly outnumber my enemy. Let's take a look at what we're talking about here then. Well, what did I say? 70 to 51. We've got weird odds chart here. A lot of variance in the odds, or a lot of granularity. That always makes things more difficult. I need a calculator when that's the case, and let's see if we can get this figured out. So, well, we can kind of reason it out. 50 to 70 is going to be below 1.5 to 1, right? However, we don't know who's in charge. Okay, well, the higher ranking leader is Bohemond. So here's the problem. Bohemond's the attacker if I use him. I don't know who the Syrians are going to use. I'm using Bohemond, but you may not want to use your best leader, is all I'm saying, because if I had a worse leader to put in place, and I don't have a worse one available. I only have these two. Even though all these troops are here, they're all lower ranked officers. Okay. So I don't know who would be the attacker if I took Godfrey. I think Ridwan is as good as Dukak. Yeah, they're both 3s. So let's check that and see what I want to do, because I may want to have the worst leader there. So that would be random then. I'm going to go with my better leader. But that means I'm attacking at 1-to-1 instead of, well, maybe defending at 1-to-1.5. However, I have the better leader. And for leaders, we'll give the red die to the Crusaders. What we're going to do is we're going to compare the combat leader to the die roll. So let's see what formation good old Dukak takes. I roll a 3. He takes an O. 3 compared to his rating of 3. And an O is an orderly withdrawal. None of these matter too much. It's not like he's going to get out of the hex easier or anything like that. For the Crusaders, I have a 4 leader. Now, the Crusader table is kind of nice if I recall correctly. And I get an F, which is flanking. So the Crusader formation is an F. There's an O. That's going to give a +1 to the Crusader. Now, where does that go? Is that die roll or column shifts? I don't rightly recall. I think it may be column shifts, in which case, hey, you know, I get probably a bonus out of it. What would I have had with a 3 leader? That's a good question. If I had a 3 leader with a 4, I would have gotten a D, which is defend in place, which means there would be no combat at all. We'd just both sit there. All right. So yeah, it's going to be columns in favor. So the attacker is going to be making a 1-to-5 attack, and we just roll a 1.5-to-1 attack. So we just roll a die for that. And the results are attacker then defender. I get a 5. The attacker is going to take 10% of his troops. The defender is going to take 25%, a retreat, and because he retreats, he's going to be disrupted, which means he can't really try to break things up. It looks like Antioch's going to fall because there's like no strength in there. I don't think I can lay a siege to it just right away. I've got to wait till next turn to start my siege of Antioch. If there had been no forces in there, one of the leaders, Godfrey, had enough movement points to keep going into Antioch. Bohemond did not, because he came from further back. All right, well, I'll resolve that. We're going to take 7 losses here, with the odd loss going to Bohemond, and we're going to take 25% of 51. Looks like 13 losses to the Syrians. Okay. So the losses have been taken. Let's not worry about the Syrians for now. The Crusader losses are the more important. I had to do something kind of special, and you see I marked them off with these. I've got to mark the strength point. I marked the change here temporarily, but that may actually shift. Now it's time to roll for leader losses. Now leader losses are weird. Basically, you're going to roll for each character as you go through in the battle. And so on a 12, I lose any given Crusader leader. I have less than 36 leaders, so there's a good chance I won't lose any. I'll have to roll for each one. That means I'm going to probably be rolling for my top dogs, because only if you lose 2 leaders are you immune from any others. But that gives me an advantage, and one of the reasons that I'm tagging these kind of lower guys like Abelard here is, hey, he's now just a one-box guy, because if he dies, his troops go home. I just lose them. But if I lose all his troops, I lose the leader without having to roll. For the Syrians, well, they're going to be rolling on a somewhat different table, and it's possible actually one or more of their leaders could be, well, one of their leaders could be captured. They only can lose one leader maximum, and they have far, far fewer there. So a lot less ristage going to go on in that one. Is that all I need to say about that? I think it is. I'll come back to resolve where the Syrians go after this, and what happens to their treasury, part of which will probably be captured. Bohemond was a little sloppy with his choices. I got confused and thought Godfrey was in charge, so I started rolling for Bohemond's guys first, and Abelard here died. So I got to mark him off. I already marked the other one off. Who is that? Abelard of Keg something Neo. There he is. And he's gone. Humphrey, I guess, is gone already. I don't know. But much, much worse, running through Godfrey's forces, we lost Duddo here, and I had gotten pretty deep into Godfrey's forces, so that's 4 strength points off for him. So that was some serious losses. 10%, because of falling back 1 hex, of the treasury from the Syrians is gone, which means $5 got transferred. Now, Bohemond didn't have to give this up. He could take it all, but instead he decided to grant 2 of the bucks to Godfrey of, hey, let's share the spoils. Now, Guile, we just won a battle, and that means that Bohemond gets another point of guile. Now, Bohemond was a 6. He'll be up to a 7 there. He has no treachery points. And now we go to the economic phase. What does the disruption mean? Primarily, I believe it means they can't attack until they spend some time in a city. Now, that's a fairly large force, so it may have to spread out into multiple cities. The Syrians suffered a pretty hefty loss there. Yeah, force-wise, what was it? 13 strength points out of 50? They still have a lot of troops on board. But they took a pretty hefty loss overall, whereas the Crusaders, well, they took almost as much, honestly. So you might be seeing things coming back. The question then becomes, what's up with these guys? They're not going to be able to cross this river next turn. However, we've got the possibility of shipping into somewhere. That could cause another battle. Ooh. That could be interesting. Got to be careful about where I land, don't I? Because Latakia is the closest place, and it's very likely they're going to go there. Do I want to slide down to some place like Beirut or Sidon? I don't know. I won't be able to trace supply up to Antioch anymore, so that's not really a viable option from the point of view of Bohemond and Godfrey. They're going to be stuck out of communication line trying to conduct this siege. Meanwhile, Raymond, what's he up to? You know, is he going to slide down here to San Simeon? I don't know. Let me look at the effects of that disruption. Must spend a full turn sitting in a castle. He can't attack, besiege, or voluntarily enter an enemy-occupied hex. How do you know what's enemy-occupied? Well, you can't write orders to go to a hex where the enemy already is, but you can kind of... You may not be able to enter a hex that the enemy's entering at the same time. You may be stuck standing out. Again, ambiguous rolling, right? Maybe this wasn't always a plotted movement game. I don't know. I'll take care of the... Okay, so as I begin to plot out my movement, I begin to see where there are problems here already. And and this may be why I've quit every time, is the two-player game works okay, but once you start trying to play it in the multiplayer game, the problems just shine through too brightly. Over here, the Syrians, one's going to retreat into Latakia, the other one back to Tortosa. Great. Well, what happens if Godfrey, who was considering, goes to Latakia? I decided, okay, I'm going to pulse my movement. Fine. How does naval movement pulse in there? Because basically, there are two questions. One would be, if it's pulsed movement and both are moving into Latakia, say in this situation, that's fine. The Syrians will get there first, and that makes sense. They're closer. But there are no rules for this. If they're both moving into here and this is further away, would they then collide and have a combat? And then does that make it illegal for the Syrians to go in there? And that's why I go with the pulsed combat movement. But now if I go to pulsed movement with the Navy, well, how fast does the Navy get there? They can go 10 hexes, so I'd say basically what I'm going to do is first movement point, everything gets to go, right? Second movement point, everything gets to go. But the navies will move 2 in each one of these. The Muslims get to move a 6th final movement point at the end of the whole thing. But, I'm just making crap up to try to make this work. And that's obviously what the guy, Mike Scott, who did the errata option, has already done. He's looked at it and said, okay, these are things. But, it's just, there's too much that's ambiguous, too many situations that it's just like, geez, man, you guys must not have played this, the playtesters. Berg, you just made something up. It's quite possible that some of the things like the written orders actually replaced some other rules. There's no indication of that in the designer's notes that, wow, this was totally... Well, what they have is the movement and attrition was developed over several weeks of playtesting. It originally had lots of die rolling. I don't know. Obviously, you get the feeling that they tried to rush something out the door saying, well, maybe this works. Who knows? But what they've got here is not adequately tested at all. So you've got kind of a build-it-yourself kit for the game, right? Anyway, that's what I'm going with, I guess. I don't know. Trying to figure out people's movement, because for the Crusaders, at least, it's not just these guys who are out of supply or out of line of communication. It's everybody down here, including poor Budamedes, who's going to be on the massive table. He's going to take 2 hits and really not have anything he can do about it. Too bad for him. Well, Muslims don't work well in the rain. I guess they rust or something, so... Ducac didn't quite make it to Tortosa. He was here 1, 2, 3 hexes. He's only able to move half speed. And he'd only be able to move 1 hex if he didn't have a line of communication. Meanwhile, Robert, Duke of Normandy, has landed there. Now you could say, well, he's disrupted. That's going to be bad. Not terribly. Disrupted doesn't really affect your defensive capabilities. So he's going to get hit there. We have a maintained full siege here. Raymond's moved into Herenc. Big expenditures. The treasuries have drained considerably, like people paying $40 because there's no line of communication, because they're getting hit with like an 8-point problem. Also, because of the bad weather, 2 of the ships have disappeared from the map. Now they'll come in next spring, but that meant Robert, who had contracted with the other players to ship him to Tortosa, only had 2 ships. He could only take 20 strength points. He ended up leaving a significant amount here under Hugh, which may or may not be able to come back into play during the winter. Eventually he'll be able to get out of there. Actually, yeah, he has enough force that he can keep it all in the city, or a small enough force that he can keep it all in the city. But he's going to have some problems here, because there's no easy traceable line of communication there, whereas the other forces have lines of communication going back to Saint Simeon now, which has become a Crusader territory. This is going to cause some serious problems for Robert, but he's got some money with him too. It's just going to be very expensive, especially during the winter where there's a guaranteed cost, even if he wins the siege. If he could get into a city, which he can't because those boats have to go home now. Well, if he retreats to them, then he gets to go home with them. Okay, now we had to determine who was in charge here. Bohemond won the die roll over Godfrey. He had a very high chance of that. His guile of 7 versus Godfrey's 5. All right, now we go to the siege table, and this is going to be pretty easy for him. We're able to do an assault. We did a full siege here. There's only 1 strength point there in Antioch. It's a level 4 city, so it's got a total of 4 strength. My leaders add up to 22 plus Godfrey's 36, 58. 58 to 4 is a lot. We're going to be on the 8 to 1 chart. It's an automatically successful siege. We are going to take, without having to do anything too special, the city of Antioch. Now, I don't remember if sieges have a possibility of a casualty. I don't believe they do. I could have offered a surrender, but yeah, it looks like the only casualties are for the leaders within the city, whatever they may be. So Godfrey, or Bohemond, has just taken Antioch. I believe that gives him an additional point of guile. Takes a city, yep. So he's +1 more. And now the Crusaders have to pick their victory conditions because Antioch has fallen. It doesn't always fall so easily. Usually you leave some troops in there and the siege becomes a hard thing. So if that had 25 troops in it, the Crusaders would never get it. They'd have to be rolling on the siege attrition table against it, and eventually it would, starve out. But that's more or less what historically happened, both sides starving. By throwing all of the Syrians up there in the front, I've hastened what the Crusaders can do in terms of continuing onward. These sieges can't be accomplished yet because, well, I have to wait a turn to establish the siege in order to do so. But yeah, this is a nice move for Bohemond. He's got one of the value cities here under his control already, and that may be more or less all I pick. I have to decide what I'm doing with Jerusalem with each of the leaders. Now, I know already Raymond is planning on grabbing things over here and what's really Mosul land. That's where the Mosuls are going to be powerful to get him down to Jerusalem. If he can take like Damascus and Jerusalem, that's a powerful, powerful set of victory points. And he can take things along the way, perhaps. Because obviously the Syrians have been weakened heavily. On the other hand, Godfrey and the northern Normans are probably interested in trying to take coastal stuff. They may be in competition with each other, and it may come down to blows in order to get to Jerusalem. Now, given that everybody else is likely going to be heading towards Jerusalem, Bohemond wants to declare for Jerusalem as well. That's just a matter of, if it's a prisoner's dilemma type of thing. If everybody doesn't do it, it's great, and you can kind of talk to each other and say, yeah, let's not. But chances are these other guys are going to be honest enough. Yeah, we're going for Jerusalem, and it's just too much of a risk to say, okay, we'll all trust each other, because if one person cheats, he gets additional troops from all the other Crusaders, and that can pretty much pad the win here. That puts us in an interesting situation for the Muslims. Obviously, the Muslims have their own goals, and I don't know entirely what they are. But like I said, this is I know that the Muslims are interested in this. You have the Fatimids who probably don't want to take things from the Syrians, but they may be willing to throw troops up here with the Syrians' consent that, say, Beirut and Sidon are going to be converted over to Fatimid territory. The more padding I can get there, the further up that the fights happen. If we can stop the Crusaders in this area, that's great. Of course, the danger always is it's hard to coordinate like multiple forces. Syrian and Fatimid could combine, but we've been seeing dissension regularly on one force or another, and that just screws all the plans up, because you've already plotted your movement, and then, oops, you guys can't cooperate. Oops, you just walked into a trap. All right, I'll plot my victory condition. We're actually moving into a new year here, another winter turn. Winter's not that bad a thing. This disrupted marker goes away because he's been sitting there for a full turn. Ducac went back to Tripoli. You can see Robert of Normandy took Tortosa, and Raymond took Harenc. Some more money showed up here, and there is a boat to transport it. The boat's under the hands of one of the people with money. There's a port under the hands of one of the people with money. That port's kind of an issue I was actually thinking of this one. That port's kind of an issue, though, because the money I want to get to Bohemond, and it doesn't get there easily. Sending someone to carry the money is tough. That money can be used for bribery and deals, but it can't really support Bohemond's army from there. Now, Bohemond's got a field treasury of 122. So he's not terribly worried about it. He can afford to stock the money there. The other money he can just give as a bribe to someone. I'm trying to not play in a cheating sort of manner, which would be, hey, Bohemond gives a bribe to someone and then they give him a bribe and the money ends up in Antioch, either in one turn or over 2 turns or anything like that. There's nothing in the rules against it, but it's goofy. That's all it is. You can transport money for free as long as you have buddies who will help you. So, yeah, overall, some higher attrition than you would expect, but not terribly, like $10 or $5. Pretty much what you'd expect from normal movement, except people didn't move very far. I think these guys actually have to siege Tortosa, though, or Latakia, though, which is going to be a problem. There's a lot of troops there. And meanwhile, Raymond is planning on moving south, I believe. The Muslims did nothing, except for Ducac moving. This isn't the time. The Fatimids want to wait until the Crusaders are actually threatening them, and they'll gather their forces and try to do something about it. It's a tough haul, though. And then over here, the Mosles, they're going to wait until the Crusaders are mainly away from them in order to do something. And that something might be taking Raymond's territory or threatening Bohemond. There is one notable thing, though. The Fatimids have this area over here that it's very unlikely, unless somebody has a lot of naval power or something, that someone is going to say, I'm going to take Egypt. And that means out of all of the Muslim powers, they're the ones the least likely to lose what they have at any time. Of course, leaving it fairly undefended as I have, it's tempting, but it doesn't mean a thing to the Crusaders unless they chose that as their victory conditions. It doesn't mean a thing to the Moslems unless they chose it. So that leaves it up to who can possibly take you out. Well, the Syrians. The Syrians are the people who are the most committed to the war with the Crusaders. They're sitting on all the territory the Crusaders almost naturally want. So it would take a clever Crusader player, and only really a Crusader could do this, to say, I'm going to go into Egypt. It would take probably a very strange Mosul player to actually make that move down there. You know, with the captures, Tortosa and Harank, we're going to actually devote both of those to the Byzantines. We should have them both here. That'll be NO for a chance at getting, and that'll be Southern and Byzantine. For a chance at getting Budimides. And if I recall correctly, if two people do it, they roll and add their guile. I've got to check guile here because both of these guys actually have gotten a single increase in guile. So we'll use the red die for Raymond. Raymond's essentially got a +1 because he started with an extra guile. This camera is so much harder to handle. Oh boy, it's a tie roll. I don't know what happened. So rather than re-rolling, and there's no rule either way for any way for this, I think it's kind of cooler to leave a tie die roll in the hands of the current situation for Budimides. He's always going to be applied to someone. So the Sicilian Normans get to keep. This is kind of an interesting situation because there's a lot of turns left. So there's a very high chance that any cities pledged don't really count. Like, you're going to get them back. And that's why people are still pledging cities. Deus Vult, number 12. Well, there's only a 1 in 36 chance, I think, of that. It only comes on a 6-3. And that'll remove the Byzantines. Now, this could be a dangerous choice for these players because they're not going to get any victory points if they don't keep these. And Budimides is not necessarily that valuable. However, the cities pledged haven't been the most valuable either. They've been 2-point cities. Those are 2 victory points each. So that's not that terrible. I'm not sure. Alright, pushing into February. Get rid of this. The Crusaders have left off, and this is kind of a fuzzy area of the rules. You can go into one of these cities if you're going to besiege it, even if the enemy is sitting there. But what you can't keep moving. But it's not really clear whether or not you can call your siege off and walk away from it. Anyway, that's what's happened here. Godfrey moved here, and I don't know how you can stop it because some of the people could be sieging, some couldn't. I guess you could just disallow both moves if they both tried. But it makes sense that you'd be able to call off a siege because you can under other normal circumstances. So I don't know that sitting around here for 1 turn on siege makes any real requirement. So Godfrey and Robert's gathered all the Norman forces here. Godfrey has pushed down a little bit. Both of them have their interests to the south. So they're not terribly interested in Latakia. Actually, the only person who is, I think, is Bohemond. He moved Buell of Chartres over here to Saint-Simeon with the intention that all this money, and another 50 showed up, so now there's 150 Byzants there, would be sailing in, and he'd distribute some of it to the Germans at cost. It would be easier than dropping it off over here in Tarsus. All worked out very well in concept. Likewise, we have a couple of Normans up here that I have to pull out of there as well. Right now that remains Norman-controlled territory. There isn't a lot of danger unless somebody pays off the Armenians to go take it or something. Who knows? That could get into some weird and kind of annoying bidding wars if you buy Armenians. Something you might want to do late in the game. We have the Fatimids moving their fleet from Caesarea to Acre. That avoids having to take any kind of attrition roll, but that's okay. But their intention was to hook up with the Syrians and provide a unified defense. And you can see the Syrians also pulled out of Homs to get to Hama. They're sending forces up from Jerusalem. But at this point, the Egyptians are kind of considering, that's a lot of money. That could be very, very helpful. Someone else A couple of people got treachery points as well. Raymond, he gave one to his cleric Adamar, and if I'm thinking correctly, the Fatimids actually got one. Mossel's got some bonus extra troops over here in Edessa, but not a lot's happening here. You know, it's winter time. Okay, after the Egyptians weighed their possibility of grabbing Famagusta, which is pretty much assured, and there was a lot of money, and 50 more bucks showed up actually, but they didn't know about that ahead of time. They instead went along with the plan that they had agreed to with the Syrians, which is this joint force to attack Tortosa. You can see the Egyptians are here by sea. The Syrians have come from both the south and from the north. There's a problem, however. The Fatimids got dissension. They're going to have to withdraw from the hex to another hex. That's going to leave the Syrians alone, but Robert of Flanders marched out with the majority of the forces here, including Robert, Duke of Normandy, to go take Tripoli, and that leaves only Godfrey here to face the Syrians. It's going to work out kind of interestingly. Meanwhile, Raymond has marched over to Aleppo. Basically, he had too many troops to leave in Harank and is tired of just paying to maintain them anyway, so he's going to start establishing his siege there. He's actually got a bit of a problem. Next turn, no matter what, pretty much, next turn the river floods because we're hitting a rain turn next turn. Now, he has a supply line running through here right now, but it could be a problem of some sort, conceivably. The Mossels, for example, could cut him off, perhaps. It didn't happen, though. They didn't move, and that's fine. So, we've got a couple of major battles here. This is not a battle, but there's very little sitting there, just one strength point, and now it's going to be blockaded in that city with no easy way out and a bunch of Syrian leaders, which of course can be sold off. Godfrey looks like he's just been sold up the river, though. Does he have the ability to withdraw into the town? No, I don't think so, because Tortosa is only a 2-level city. Level 2 and 3 only hold 25 men. He's got more than 25. He's got to stay out and fight. Meanwhile, the Normans are inside Tortosa and, well, likely doomed, but we'll see. Really, the question is, does Robert go save his one strength point that he's got in there, or does he take Tripoli? His interest is more to the south, so he'll probably abandon that. That's going to show for some real difficulty for the Crusaders, though, I think, no matter what. Well, we'll see what the battle brings. Well, Godwin lost badly. I think I said Godwin and not Bohemond or Baldwin or something like that. Baldwin's with him. Not only did he lose almost as many troops as the Syrians did. The Syrians had more troops present, but the die roll, actually the command die roll went very well for Godwin. He was down here at the 1 to 2, but he ended up with 3 shifts in his favor. He's not really a great combat leader. Baldwin's actually better, but he can't use Baldwin. But he got the best result, the coordinated charge. But then when he got the actual roll, he rolled poorly, getting, I think, the 20 retreat and a 15. So you can see he's got a disrupted force, which means he has to find some place to go hide. And there really isn't anyone willing to take him in right now. So he's got to kind of like maybe make his way back to Antioch, and Bohemond will let him recover there, conceivably. This bodes very poorly for the Crusaders, even though they did, I think, 2 more points of damage to the Syrians, but then Godwin lost a couple of his leaders, so that's 2 more strength points. So it ended up an even attritional battle. It's not great for the Syrians, though. They're taking the losses, and the Egyptians were hors de combat there. It could have gone very, very badly for the Syrians had Robert stuck around there. And now the Egyptians may just run over to Famagusta or whatever and grab that cash, flee back, and let the Syrians deal with what they've got to deal with. They escaped the bullet here, and now the whole of the Jerusalem area is open, so the Fatimids could actually start seizing some Syrian territory there. That puts Syria in a really tough spot. I guess I'll send this one up, because I don't know what else I'm going to do tonight, and kind of trying to, I don't know, I really dragged my feet on this one, I guess. Alrighty.